Good afternoon. Like many of you out there on the internet, CJ and I both at one point in our lives, maybe we're ashamed to admit this, we were libertarians. We were libertarians who subscribed to the non-aggression principle and all of those things. And then something happened. We became not libertarians anymore, and not like together. Right. One day we just woke up and I
There was
messaged
something
him.
in there was something in the air.
Yeah, I
You just
messaged
felt
him
it.
and I'm like, "Hey, man, I don't think I'm a libertarian anymore." And he's like, "That's okay, I'm not either." Uh,
Well, the funniest part is we and a couple other mutuals, some of whom are still around. We were in control of a Christian libertarian Facebook group. We were,
yes,
we were, and then
the
we all
moderator.
like we
Yeah,
all we all just realized that we're not, and that libertarianism is actually really cringe. Like, even if you
extremely.
were still like adhering to like the propositions or whatever, but we all at the same time were like, this is actually really dumb. So we were running this group and we basically just killed it. It's like
We
that
quit
meme
all at the same time.
the meme of the guy like turns around and shoots. Like, we were just shooting the group, you know, and like everyone's like, what's going on? Like the admins are
The
going rogue.
admins.
Yeah,
Yeah,
they're going completely rogue on us. And we were just dunking, and then that lasted like a month, and then we basically
right.
experienced a coup, and we were kicked out. But it was fun. We went out with a bang.
Yeah, blaze of glory. Yeah, yeah, for me, I think I got into libertarianism in 2008 with the Ron Paul campaign. Like this comment here from Tim Miller: Ron Paul may be right wing. Thank you, Dr. Paul. Yes, I mean that is 2008, and then especially 2012. His presidential campaigns. That's when both. I think I can speak for you. Around the same time for you too, and it was it was new and exciting. It was a way of viewing politics and government and society and all of these things in a way that challenged my basic presuppositions that I'd always had. I grew up riding with my dad in the truck, listening to Rush Limbaugh. I always found politics interesting, but it was just your basic normie con views that I had and everything. Then Ron Paul comes and starts challenging these things and saying like, "Oh, well, maybe the Iraq War was a mistake, right? Maybe that was bad." And at first, I thought like he's this big, horrible, liberal, and I didn't like him because how dare he speak ill of George W. Bush? And then I started listening to him and arguing with people, and I was persuaded. Right? Oh, actually, this was a mistake. This was really bad. And delve deeper into the political philosophy that drove him. I started listening to like Tom Woods, for example, the content that he was starting to put out, and yeah, I was off into the deep end of libertarian theory, and it was great. I started reading Rothbard and Mises, reading Human Action, and I loved it. I thought these guys are brilliant. They're super sharp, and like, what was your journey, your gateway into it,
Yeah,
CJ?
it's similar. What I understood, 2012, 11, 12, same as you, was that the Republican Party, because I was really into the Constitution, right, and
Yeah,
like maintaining the original principles and all that stuff of the founding, and I realized that the GOP was basically just a scam, and they
yeah,
didn't adhere to any of that, and the actual constitutional position on things like Iraq and central banking were actually Ron Paul. I mean, Ron Paul
yep,
was like a constitutional originalist, which is
mhm,
hilarious because people like Michael O'Fallon and others like that, they're like the Constitution. They would never endorse someone like Ron Paul,
no, too
who's way more.
radical.
Yeah, he's way more. He's like a constitutional purist. That's
Yeah,
ironic, and that's funny. But anyways, it was like all the things that we learned in school about the right to life, liberty, and property. Libertarianism seemed to call out the establishment for failing to uphold those things,
yeah,
and it alone could fulfill those claims. The things that we were taught were fundamental to America turned out to
mhm,
be fulfilled in libertarianism, and that's kind of what attracted me at first. And then you get deeper into it, and you realize that it's actually like a purification of those liberal
mhm,
ideals. and it's like takes everything down to their logical conclusion. So libertarianism is very logical. Like the actual, like if you actually look at the dogmas of the doctrine itself, it's very rational, very logical, very consistent. It applies its principles absolutely into every asset or aspect of social life. So there's no exceptions. That's kind of what libertarianism is. It's the claims of liberalism taken to their logical conclusion. And I was really into that. I thought that you could actually have a political theory built on rationalism. And so, I mean, we're going to talk about the the undoing of libertarianism, but that's one of the main features of my disillusionment with it is the fact that politics is messy. Politics requires you to make judgments that are not purist, and it requires you to make decisions between, like the way that politics works is it requires you to choose between alternatives. You can't just blueprint this ideal society. That's actually a catalyst for revolution and tearing down the things
Yeah.
that you love. So
Yeah, it's fundamentally utopian, and that's one of the things. And of course, libertarians would like shriek if you say that their society's utopian, but ultimately it is, right. It's this idealistic vision for human society that is bound by these principles that are unflinching, and that's not the way the world actually is, right. You have to deal with the reality of the world, and you can't have pristine, stainless steel principles that never bend or buckle, because you're confronted with
exceptions.
all sorts of
Yeah.
circumstances that are not ideal, right. When you have to pick trade-offs, right.
Mhm.
This situation is better than this one, but it's not great, right. That's what you're constantly confronted with all of life, and doesn't, you can't function that way
Mhm.
in any conceivable sense, and it's always looking for, all right, one day when we have the free society, then this is the way it'll be. We'll have the non-aggression principle and we'll apply it this way, and a lot of it too. I mean, I think I began to think about politics and just the social structure and how societies are formed and how they operate, and and along these lines of the difference between an ideal world and a practical one. And I just began to think like, okay, well, it was ironic, like you would have these the people that would like argue against libertarianism in not like in good faith. They'd be like, well, there's no, or especially like anarcho-capitalism, they'd be like, well, there's no government in Somalia. Why why don't you have your perfect libertarian society there in Somalia? And I would hear that argument, and of course, like the rebuttal to that was, well, culturally, it's not suitable for this, right? That would be like, I think I remember like Tom Woods making that argument, and I stepped back for a second. I thought, wait a second, why? Right? Why is it only suitable for like Western countries? Right? Why doesn't it work? They don't have a government. Why don't they just have a spontaneously well ordered society? And it's like, well, those things don't happen spontaneously, right? You don't spontaneously generate a well-ordered society. There are people, right? People are what make up a society, and it takes centuries or millennia to build up the kind of society where you can have the America of 1776. Right,
Yeah.
that did just spring up spontaneously. Like, they just all woke up one day and said, like, why don't we just have a constitution
Yeah.
and and a bill of rights? Wouldn't that be great?
This
That's
is
it's not the way it works.
this is where so much of my own thinking comes in, because I began to realize the importance of historical development in the shaping of society, and that as individuals, there's this concept in political theory, the state of nature, right? And so
Yeah.
we have to conceive of man in the state of nature in order to determine what his rights are, where just relations can be identified. And you begin to realize that there is no man who is ever born independent of social structures, that man is the
Yes.
product of pre-existing arrangements. And
Yeah.
so I began to basically come into Paul Gottfried's interpretation, which is very historicist, and realize that our rights are socially situated, and they come from historical tensions, and they come from the competing clashes of groups and that's where rights come from, and that our rights were earned over 1,000 years. We didn't start free and then slowly find ourselves in totalitarian situations like Rousseau postulated. Rather, it's the opposite. There was chaos, and then order was applied, and then over time order had to work itself out to give us, over historical development, the rights that we're familiar with.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, I mean, that historicism really drove my way out of the libertarian universalist abstract type of thinking.
Yeah, that too. I mean, I think some of it, let's see, in when did I, officially make my break from the libertarian? It's always kind of murky, it's like,
well, first you don't like it. First you're ashamed of it, right?
Yeah,
and then you can convince yourself to actually leave it. Yeah,
I'm just not in it anymore. Probably like 2015 or 2016, and I think it, the presidential election that year, I don't think was the catalyst for it necessarily. I think it was much more my own personal experience, like growing up. I mean, I was turned 30 in 2016, and I had a few kids, and you begin to think about the world in a different way when you grow up, right? I thought those same thoughts that you did, and that, like, Paul Gottfried expresses, that, okay, because I'd be thinking about like Hans Hermann Hoppe's covenant communities and things like that. And I thought about that in the context of my own children, right? Say we joined this covenant community in this Hoppian vision. What about the people born into it, right? They didn't voluntarily choose this society. And of course, his answer would be, well, if they don't want to be there, they can leave. We'll physically remove them, right? But that's not how societies function, right? They're passed on from generation to generation. There are mores and standards and ways of life that are passed on from generation to generation, and that's what it's built out of. It's not, you can't like just backfill this voluntarist way of life spontaneously. That just doesn't work at all, right? No human being is this totally isolated individual. And that's what the system posits, is you have people that are completely stripped from the past, right? There's no connection between them and the past. We're forging this new voluntary community. And it's like, well, nobody, even if you consciously are trying to do that, you can't possibly do that. You're the culmination of all the experiences of life you had, all the generations that preceded you and everything else. And even if you reject that, it still is what has formed what you are. And so I began thinking about things in those terms. It's like, well, okay, guys like Russell Kirk or Paul or Paleo make a lot more sense in terms of how they approach the world. It leaves room for wisdom with these gray areas, because I was seeing this. All right, here are these rigid principles that are universal, and here are particulars and particular ways of life and situations, and seeing the conflict between those two, and thinking, all right, this doesn't work. The idealism, the universal, does not work at all. You need, and it's not an argument for like situational ethics either. That's the thing people will say, is like, oh, that's what you're positing is situational ethics. No, it's that there are particular ways of life that are suitable for particular peoples and environments. It
is situational politics, though, right?
Yeah, of course.
There is a distinction between public action and private action. I mean, this is why, like, understanding things like turn the other cheek. I mean, there's a difference between the function of a political ruler and the Christian duties of a private citizen. I mean, so this is the point. This has been made again and again over Christian history. The king doesn't have to turn the cheek of the nation. You know what I mean? He's allowed to defend their way of life, and so it's not situational ethics, because in your capacity as a person, as a human being, as a creature, without any political authority, you do have, there are absolute standards of ethics, but in political, there is situational politics, because we're choosing between alternatives, and that's what it means to have political authority. When we say that God's granted people political authority, that's what we're talking about. The ability to make decisions about what types of actions are legitimate and illegitimate, good and bad, profitable and edifying and unprofitable. And so that's what it means to have political authority, is to it's a sanction on politics as a situationally varying dynamic in society.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, let's go to some of the comments quick. This one I think we should get to from Ben Legbend. Is this broadcast recorded or on another platform for future viewing? He's commenting from Twitter, X, formerly known as Twitter. Yes, this will be on YouTube and also on audio out there in the audio Apple and Spotify and so forth. So if you want to find it or share it, that's where you can find it. Aaron Siver makes a great point. He and I have talked about this before. I come to realize that libertarianism only works for competent and able single adult men. It's really true. And he follows up as you're articulating. The classic thought experiment for libertarianism is Robinson Crusoe on a desert island with amnesia. Right, it has nothing to do with the givenness of reality.
Mm-hmm.
Right, that's it. It's something where you want to assert this like tabula rasa on all of society, and that's not possible. Or if it is, it's it's like Cambodia and Pol Pot, right?
Yeah.
Only libertarian, right? You're not going to be able to do that, man. Like, it just doesn't work. Yeah. This is a good question. You want to hit this one, CJ? Dylan says, if everyone has the obligation to not murder you, would that then be a natural right to life?
Yeah, but so the thing is, the point of politics is to turn these abstractions into laws that can govern society.
Because concrete reality. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's the function of politics and lawmaking. Is to take these abstractions and to do that. And so you have to set up rules to determine when the taking of life is appropriate and when it's inappropriate, because the rule about having the right to life and not murdering or whatever, we all agree that there's certain definitions on that, like self-defense, what constitutes self-defense, proportionality, when can the government respond to certain actions with the death penalty, or can it? Like, these are all things it has to apply,
or war.
It has to apply abstractions into concrete ways, and they're going to look different in different types of societies. So that's the point of politics, is to make them concrete. So there are things that are consistent with our humanness, but they all have to be applied to particular societies, and that's kind of the point.
Yeah, that's
yeah.
good. That's exactly right. I mean, I don't know if you saw on Twitter the Reddit trolley problem meme. It was like there's 2,331 death row inmates right now. They're all lined up on the track, and on the other track is somebody you love the most, your wife, right? Do you pull the switch or not? And it's like, is that even why is it even a question? Like, what?
Yeah.
But that I mean, that's obviously, I mean, it's absurd and silly, but that is the question there with regard to the state and power and wielding power, making law, is you make these kinds of decisions. That's part of how God has set up the world, right? There are natural hierarchies in society. I mean, I've even thought about it too, just in general. Like, if you think about state of nature type stuff, right? You think like a Mad Max situation or whatever. What will happen is there will be the biggest, baddest guy and all of his thugs. They will form some kind of war band, and eventually their will and power that they are able to wield becomes legitimized in some type of political structure, right? That is naturally what happens. And the guy might be good or he might be bad, and if he's good, there'll be order and continuity and so forth. And like, that's where societies arise out of, right? And some of it's a question of scale. Like you have tribal societies all the way up to nations and empires, but that's how it works, right? Like power and the wielding of power is a constant in human society, and so a lot of libertarianism is just like rejecting that. Like, oh,
Mhm.
somehow we could take the we could take the beach ball and just keep pushing it under the water and it'll stay there, right? We'll just not have government and that'll be good. But even then, like you read Hoppe's not Man, Economy, and State, Democracy, the God That Failed, and his theories about covenant communities and so forth. Like all you're doing is constructing a government. It's just
Well,
the organizing principle is voluntarism.
one of the thing I haven't thought about this in a long time, but one of the things about libertarianism that people actually misunderstand is that it's better conceived of not in terms of like aggression, but in terms of like legitimate property claims, you
Yeah,
know? And when you realize that you're born into a system with pre-existing claims of property, then there's no aggression anyways. Like there, the people
hmm,
already have their properly delineated rights
yeah,
that are pre-exist you. And so like you come into a situation, you can't say to your father, like, you have no right to tell me to go to the bed or get dressed or how to eat. Like it doesn't make sense because you're there as a guest and he is the owner, the sovereign of that household. You know what I
yeah,
mean? So you come into that situation. When you grow up, you're entering into pre-existing dynamics of society. So at all times, everywhere you go, unless there's chaos, unless you live in anarchy, you already are existing within the structure of authority, and that's what
yeah,
society is. You
yeah,
can't ever say there's no point in time when you can say I'm above or I transcend the order. You're
yeah,
born into something, and so you're born first into your house, and your father represents you. Like if it was just your nuclear family, in some virgin territory somewhere in like medieval Europe, right? And it's just you and your family. If your father decides that he wants to join together with some other family for something, you don't have a choice. Your father, he
yeah,
represents you. He speaks for you. There's no you can't consent to that, right? And
yeah,
so when you grow up and take his place, there's already a society there that's already prearranged and pre-structured that you have to adhere to because it's been determined for you in the same way that your life was determined for you when you grew up in his household. That's how
yeah,
society works. It's like a greater and that's how it works from household, to family, to kin, to tribe, to nation. And that's how nations are formed. And so there's always this complex network of rights and obligations and duty, of constraints, of freedoms.
hmm,
And so the freedoms that we've been given are the product of history. You've been given those freedoms over time, by political dynamics that basically have unfolded over 1,000 years.
yeah, yeah. That's more or less what I came to realize in my late 20s, early 30s is I didn't I didn't choose to be born in the family I was born in. That
Mhm.
was that was imposed upon me by God. I didn't choose to be born in America in the late 20th century, right? There's so much of life is stuff you never chose and you just deal with it,
Mhm.
right? And so much of libertarian and voluntarist thought is the idea that we could overcome those things and
Or that we
supersede.
have we have the legal right to overcome them. That's the
Yes,
thing.
yeah, that the
It's like
child can say to his father, the 4-year-old, like, "You're not the boss of me," and
right.
have the right to do that.
Yeah,
It's absurd.
right.
And so I mean, certainly, like you grow up in a situation like ours, especially like you think young children now, the world that they're growing up in is something monstrously totalitarian and becoming more obvious by the day. Like today, they arrested this journalist from the Blaze for investigating um, the the Epiphany protests of 2021, and it's like this is nuts, right? All these people complaining about Navalny dying in prison, and they're arresting journalists in America, and it's this horrible totalitarian system that we have in America that they're being born into. Like they didn't choose that. Nobody chose it. and
Mhm.
you have to deal with the system that you were in. Like you
Mhm.
can work to change it and all these other things, but it's not something where you could just spontaneously develop your own society apart from it, right? I think so much of America, though, too, is because we have this ethos, especially in the Midwest and particularly in the West. You do have people descended from those who got in covered wagons and went and settled the wilderness. Right, it was just them and their family, or maybe a couple other families, and it's like where they have this ethos where we built our own society actually, and we
Mhm.
are independent and we have all these rights, and so it's distilled from that, and so it's in one sense it's understandable that people think that way because that's what America actually was 150 years ago. um but it certainly isn't that anymore, right?
Mhm.
It's not even close to that, and we don't have the rights that we thought that we did. They don't exist. We've lost the nation that we once had, and those things they don't just come back because we say so, right? That's
Mhm.
part of it too. Is like the even like the Ron Paulian very constitutional purism, people wanting that, and that's of course that's great. I don't I'm glad people want that. Uh, they aren't just you can't just snap your fingers and it's um back to the constitutional order we had, right? That's not happening. That instead there's a political struggle,
Mhm.
right? That is what you're confronted with, and I think that's a lot of what happened to me in 2015 and 2016. You saw it. I mean, I was very involved in GOP politics with like the Ron Paul campaign in like 2012, and you see how like evil the GOP was.
Mhm.
Um, and it oh they're playing ads in the live stream. I didn't realize that. I'm sorry. I didn't realize. I turned it on. I didn't realize they would play it during the live stream. Sorry about that, guys. We won't do. We're still experimenting with these things. I see the comment. Um, but I saw in that campaign, especially in 2012, the things that they did to Ron Paul, and I saw them trying to do the same things to Donald Trump in 2016. And you realize, like you said earlier, that the GOP is this vehicle for destroying any opposition to the destruction of our country and the things that we inherited. And it made me recognize, even though I didn't have the vocabulary for it, friend enemy distinction.
Mhm.
I began to become aware about politics in those terms for the first time. And it's like, well, how can I be this like purist, principled libertarian with the non-aggression principle and all of these things when we have enemies that need to be fought?
Yeah,
And
that's another thing about, like, people say that libertarianism, only works in certain situations. Well, what they're trying to say is that it's only after the enemy has been defeated, or only after the structures are in place to deal with an enemy, can you have the
Mhm.
type of freedom that we had been afforded. See, that the reason that we were so free is because underlying it all on the foundation was the fact that we were dealing with enemies. There was like, you couldn't have conceived of a situation in early America where they would have allowed for homosexual marriage. These
Yeah,
things were just hegemonically, beyond even the capacity for anybody in society to accept that. And so therefore we could be free because our choices would not have included those choices. But once we lose the moral fabric and once things are subverted at the institutional level, we can no longer be libertarian anymore because we have to deal with enemies.
yeah,
Once the enemies are dealt with, we can have more freedom. So freedom is something that comes about only, like, I think I said this like 5 episodes ago, that liberty is downstream from defeating your enemies. Like, we can have our
yeah,
rights back after the enemies are defeated. That's the way politics work.
yeah. That's the only way it works. And I think it took seeing that we have actual real enemies in various capacities to recognize that. And I remember the 2016, 2017, that time period where I saw like in Trump I wasn't, here I am coming from this very purist libertarian world, and like here is a guy who is very impure, principled, and I thought, all right, if Hillary Clinton wins and the regime is able to do everything that they want, that is bad for me. And here's an actual opposition, however ineffectual he might be, and he ended up largely being. I want that instead. So I'm not hoping that there's going to be a guy that would come in and end the Federal Reserve and all of these kind of these things that I wanted that weren't very realistic, right? I had to set those things aside because like there's real enemies confronting us that want to destroy me and my family and everything I love. And so I'm going to fight. I'm going to vote for the guy that will fight or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
That is what I came to realize. And yeah, that once all that's out of the way, then we could talk about, monetary policy. And
Well, it's funny because this is like the contribution of James Burnham and like the idea, and even like Calhoun, right? John C. Calhoun, that only like when you're libertarian, you think that like all we have to do is change the hearts and minds of those that are in our communities. If we can change hearts and minds, then we can change the political trajectory of the United States. It's like, no, this is the lesson. This is the realistic
yeah.
lesson of Machiavellian politics. And you're not allowed to say Machiavellian politics in Christian circles, but the reality is that ideology cannot confront power. Only power can confront power. Only when you have a power block, only when you have people capable and willing and in a position to actually confront other power blocks can you have freedom. Freedom is downstream from confronting your enemies. This is the lesson of Machiavellian politics. You're not going to convince your entire community to be a libertarian and therefore we'll get our rights back. It's like, no, you have to actually wield power against those who are seeking your destruction. And that's the hard lesson for libertarians is, and this is the point. When you have power, you're not wielding it against individuals. I mean, the whole point of power, like we can enforce laws against people doing bad things, sure, but that's not the fundamental purpose of political power. The fundamental purpose of political power is to absorb the theater of politics. It's to point a spotlight on it and say, this is where political factions are going to confront each other. That's the point of politics. It's to wield power against other blocks of power, against institutions, against would-be totalitarians, against would-be tyrants. That's the point of power. It's to confront other institutional enemies, not to round, like they have the meme of the under his watchful eye, like that's fun. It's fun to play with that, but that's actually not like the point. We're not trying to control individuals, because individuals will basically just change their behavior based on how the elites are running things. The opinions of the masses are basically downstream from power. That's where masses get their. So in a Christian society, in a colonial America, everyday Americans basically look to their pastors, their political leaders, philosophers, theologians, even like the heads of like corporations and business centers. That's where the masses get their ideas from. So the point is not to wage war on the masses. The point is to wage war at the institutional level and to confront power with power.
Yeah, I think to support a lot of what you're saying, I wrote about this a while back for Gab News, that you look at things like gay marriage in Obergefell, and 30 years ago, I mean, so your state, for instance, in what was it, 2008, passed what was it, Proposition 8? Is that California, right, banned gay marriage in 2008, 7 years before Obergefell. So there was a majority in the state of California that said, nope,
still
we
is
don't
a
want
majority,
that.
by the way.
Of actual Californians, yeah.
Right. What kind of Californian?
Yeah, that's right. And like what changed since then? And you look at polling now and support for across every age cohort except for the Zoomer. It's gone, it's gone up actually. Opposition to gay marriage has gone up by like 2% among the Zoomers. But every other one, there's this after Obergefell, there's this radical shift
Yeah.
because power provides its own incentives for ideology, right? The masses are adaptable, and they will respond to the incentives that those with power give them. That's reality.
This is
Um,
and this is a good point right here. I mean, this is it, people
yeah,
res-
yeah,
people respond and react to the narratives that they're given, you
yeah.
know?
Judges said it's okay for gay marriage, so now Alistair Begg is saying go to the gay weddings. Yeah, that's exactly right.
Yeah.
Um, and I mean, you even see this. There was a guy who was one of the guys at Masters Seminary that was upset about the Alabama Supreme Court ruling regarding IVF, and because they quoted the Bible. That's so inappropriate and improper. They shouldn't be doing that. It's like, what? Are you crazy? But like the reason why is because, right? Why do people think, like, why did even Christians, Christian leaders, seminary presidents think this way? Because they're responding to incentives, right? That's how human beings operate,
Mhm.
and it's not even like consciously most of the time, right? People are not consciously thinking, "Oh, well, that's the law now. I better get with the program." Uh, and like turncoating on these things. It's you see everybody else doing it because everyone else is responding to the same incentives, and you naturally just adapt to it unless you are antisocial like we are. But but no, it is that is how things work. So it's not like you're wielding power against the masses, or and the flip side of that is like the idea that, oh, you just need to have the free marketplace of ideas and you just persuade people. Right? That's not people don't get persuaded by ideas. Right? Ideology doesn't win the day, power does.
Yeah.
And that's the reality people need to recognize.
Yeah, feelings
Um,
don't care about your facts.
Yeah, 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 exactly. Like that's it, 100%.
Yeah.
And I think when I was in the libertarian world, that's what I thought is, well, if I just persuade enough people, 50% plus one of the country to follow the non-aggression principle, then we'll have our free society. And it's like, well, no,
You have to defeat the
that's
enemy. Yeah.
that's not the way it works, man. Like it's not gonna one, you're not gonna persuade them because
Yeah.
all the incentives are aligned for them not to agree with you. And
So
two,
so
even
those
if
are
you do, yeah,
like the first thing we talked about was like the historicist perspective of where rights come from. I call that like the Burkean case against
yeah.
libertarianism. Then we talked about like the Burnham case against it, which is
Mhm.
basically that only power can confront power. But there's also an element to our time that's important that people need to realize too. That's like what I would consider the like the Gramsci case, like Antonio
Yeah.
Gramsci, right? The Italian. I don't know if I'm saying that right.
I say
Gramsci or
Gramsci,
yeah.
but
I think
601.
Gottfried says Gramsci, but he speaks Italian, so he can do that.
Yeah, I'll let him.
Um,
I'll let him do
yeah,
that. It's allowed.
but so what they realized, what the I mean, he was kind of a forerunner of like a critical theory and like a
Yeah.
like the new Marxism, which is
Mhm.
not really classical Marxism. But what they realized is all you had to do was radicalize, capture the institutions, the private
Mhm.
institutions, not the state, right? So like
Mhm.
traditional communism, like Leninism, you capture the state, like in Russia, you kill
Mhm.
the Tsar, take over. That's the Bolshevik Revolution. The a lot of the more Western theorists, especially in like the French tradition, they realized that that wouldn't really work in the West because there was such a strong civil society was too strong for that. You would lose your legitimacy in state power if you just took over the halls of the government alone. You had to capture the
Mhm.
cultural aspect of things. So this is another where a big weakness of libertarianism, because they emphasize the free market and like the freedom of the culture to organically develop on its own or whatever. So what cultural revolutionaries had to do in the
Mhm.
West was it had to subvert and like basically flip over, the Christianness of American
Mhm.
culture. Even though we're not allowed to say that we have a Christian culture, we actually did have a Christian culture. And what they
Yes,
had
we
to
did.
do is subvert it, radicalize it, transit, so to speak, so that the culture itself would basically eat its own cultural inheritance. And
Yeah.
there's no libertarian strategy to fight that at all.
No,
The
because it's all
libertarians are
private.
not
Yeah.
equipped to deal with Gramsci's strategy.
Yeah. Even I remember libertarians making this argument in in those days, 2015 or 2016, when Twitter was really starting to roll out, and Facebook and all the big tech companies, censorship and banning people and things like that. And I remember they would just say, well, it's a private company.
Yep.
They could do what
Exactly.
they want. It's a private company. It's like,
It's brilliant. It's a
no,
brilliant strategy. You could
yeah,
turn our classical liberal instincts on their head in doing that.
yeah, yeah. And
Yeah, it's
that's
brilliant.
exactly what they did with everything. And so it's
Mhm.
not just the tech companies and things like that. It's also every cultural institution
Yeah,
in the country,
banking.
including churches, and
Including
universities,
churches.
everything. That were, and you pervert the principles that they hold from the inside, so that, and in such a way that those principles are wielded to protect you and the subversion that you're doing from ever being challenged. Right? That's the brilliance of the Gramscian scheme. And like,
Yeah,
Alinsky is just downstream from Gramsci,
yeah, for
and,
sure. But
so that's what it
people
is.
really, yeah, people need to get that because this is so brilliant because like all the things that were used to save us from like the managerial revolution, like the state shouldn't get involved in this, we should have the
Mhm.
constitution says that the federal government should stay out of this area. All these things are so core to the earlier fights against communism that we weren't ready for the subversion of the private society, because
Yeah,
now it's like, okay, well, your bank actually says that it's illegal to criticize homosexuals. What does the
yeah,
Constitution say
or
about that?
yeah,
Like,
nothing.
so this is another element where it's just like the crisis of culture requires us to use political means, because
Mhm.
otherwise our entire cultural memory and continuity will be homicided.
Yeah.
That's just what's going to happen, and there's nothing we can do to stop it if we're libertarians.
No, 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 there isn't. And yeah, you see you see this everywhere. Yeah, like the example of debanking. Right? There's no yeah, there's no law that says they can't, refuse to do business with you.
Hmm.
Right? They're a private company. They can do whatever they want. And you see that. You see how in in 15 or 16, you had these the response to Obergefell by all these different states that had passed, religious freedom restoration acts to protect people like the Masterpiece Cake Shop guy, Jack Phillips. And what happened when like the state of Indiana is a prime example, which was governor, under Governor Mike Pence, wonderful, awesome Christian governor, right? And all of these giant corporations went to Indiana and said, unless you get rid of this bill or refuse to apply it or whatever, we're going to pull all of our business out of there.
Hmm.
And dutifully, he does what he is told,
Hmm.
right? And and that's how they wield like private society when in the way that they can't with government, right? That's how you're able to have, despite like this heritage of the First Amendment, have like mass censorship all over the internet because, oh, it's private, it's totally private, it's a private company, you can do whatever you want.
Hmm.
And so multiply that across everything, every part of society that's private, and there are no defenses for it whatsoever. And that's a thing that pulled me out of libertarianism too, like seeing that, right?
Yeah.
Seeing that, oh yeah, I don't have an answer for that question, and the answer
Well, it's
stares you
funny.
right in the face. It's
It's funny.
wielding power against that.
Yeah, exactly. Yesterday, 2 days ago, Michael O'Fallon. Did you see this? I don't know if you saw this. I don't know if I have it here, but he was like, it's terrible that it was the CEO is it Starbucks, or what's the big tech company that the CEO is like really bad?
You're gonna have
It's
to
like
be more
Salesforce.
specific,
Yeah,
man.
Salesforce.
Oh
The
yeah,
CEO of
yeah,
Salesforce.
yeah,
He was buying a bunch of private land in Hawaii, right? And
yeah.
Michael O'Fallon's like, oh, this is bad because all these leftists. And I was like, so is there a libertarian or is there a political
Classical
solution
liberal.
we can use
Yeah.
here, or do we just have is this just the free market at work? And he blocked me. So it's like but we should be dealing with these questions because there is no
Yes.
free market solution here.
No, there isn't. There isn't. And it's the same thing like the Chinese buying land all over America, right? Is there a libertarian answer to that? Well, it's like, well, they're using money and it's a free exchange between private parties.
Yeah.
And it's like, I don't really care.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Man,
Yeah.
I don't really care. Let's look. There's some comments here. Uh, let's look at what the other Paul has to say. What time is it there, Paul? We ask him this every week.
Yeah.
Is it like, it's
Just
like 11
make
in the
something.
morning.
It's midnight.
Yeah. What day is it? Still, February 29th there? Is it February 30th? Do they have leap year over there? Your discussion here of different structures all being subverted by evil further proved to me that pontificating about the best form of government is largely a waste of time, and
Yes.
likewise vindicates biblical teaching on government, not whether to make a republic, monarchy, anarcho-syndicalist utopia. Scripture just has to just says to have just and strong leaders. And yeah,
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
exactly it.
That's particularism. Like
Yes.
like so, like people Stephen writes about the Christian Prince, right?
Yeah.
And so like and I'm doing
No,
yeah,
monarchy.
you want a monarchy.
Yeah.
It's like, well, it's like, no, what what we're saying is that you have to first understand, the function of power, and then you have to apply that within whatever is relevant to your situation, right? So
Yeah.
what it looks like for us here in a federal, historically federal system with state powers and more localized power structures is different than it would look like in England. Like in
Yeah.
England, it'd be really cool if Prince William, like, found his inner King Arthur, and like basically declared that Parliament is actually out of session now, and that he's going to embody the English past. Like that'd be pretty base.
Yeah.
We can't have that here though.
No.
It would work for English history, but it wouldn't work here. So
What we could have in America is a right-wing FDR is what we would have.
mhm,
Right? That's you would have to frame it in those ways. Um where you have this like right-wing president for life who wields power basically unilaterally, threatens the Supreme Court to basically do whatever, pass whatever he wants. Like that would be how it's done. And how do you get to that point? You would have to have a major crisis
mhm,
where a figure like that would be able to rise to the occasion. But that's exactly it. It's the recognition that whatever phrase you want to use, I mean, it's much more potent with saying the Christian Prince, but it's a Christian ruler,
mhm,
a godly man who's wise, and that's, I mean, when you want to talk about like what the Bible has to say about politics, like the book of Proverbs is a manual for a Christian king. Like, literally, it is written by Solomon for his son to learn how to rule. That's the
yeah,
point of the book. And that's what it has to say about government is here's the kind of man that should be shaped by wisdom and the kind of wisdom he has to wield in order to rule well. That's what we need. And you can't do it. Jim Jordan, Ron Dodson last week, brought him up and a lot of the good contributions he's made. One of the things that stuck with me from him that I think is really profound is you see in the Bible the stages of maturity that take place where when Israel's under the law and it's under the priesthood in its earlier stages, right? Everything is black and white, right? The law is black and white. You do this, you don't do that, right? Very black and white. But you come to the time of the kings, and now you're playing in the gray, and you have two harlots come to you. One has a live baby, the other has a dead baby. What do? There's nothing in the law about
yeah,
that. You
yeah,
have to wield wisdom. You have to exercise wisdom, and you have to wield power with
mhm,
wisdom, which is
mhm,
what Solomon did. And that's what the entire book of Proverbs is about. So as it pertains to government, right, you have to be able to wield wisdom in choosing the best of 10 different scenarios. None of them are going to be ideal,
mhm,
right? That's wisdom. And like that's the stuff that all of us have to do in our daily lives, right? We have to make decisions about the house we're going to buy, or the job we're going to take, or what we're going to, do for our kids, what school they're going to go to, all sorts of different things all day long. And it's never black and white. You have to make what's gray and turn it black. Like, that's what the knowledge of good and evil actually is being able to discern between good and evil when it's not clear, when it's not obvious, when it's
Mhm,
gray, right? You got to be able to make out the black and white when it's gray.
mhm.
And that is what government requires. And so, like, the libertarian view of things is very, in this sense of the Bible, very priestly, right? It's very, this is black, this is white. And that there's good things to that. I'm not just dumping on it the whole time. But from the point of principles, you have to be able to then take the ideal and apply it to real life.
Yeah.
And it's not always so simple.
Let me use that, because this was from a couple of minutes ago, but I think this is a really good way to think about it. Everything for them
Yeah.
can be boiled
Here,
down.
you should read it for the people that are listening on
Oh, yeah.
audio.
So it
Yeah.
says, does
Yeah.
what you're describing now boil down to saying that the error of libertarianism is that it only has the category of property rights and nothing else? Yeah. So
Yeah.
can only think in terms of private relations, of private property relations and dynamics. There's nothing greater than the individual property relations. Like,
Yeah.
that's the core of it. There's a great reformed, I think he's reformed theologian, like a he was a not a jurist, but like just a legal theorist, not a political theorist, but a legal theorist named Friedrich Stahl. And he was a German, and he talked about the difference between property, private property law, and then
Mhm.
public law. So, like, the ability for private property owners to relate to each other, what are the rules of conduct for that type of thing? But then he said that's different than the king who rules about on the greater good of the realm. What is good for
Mhm.
the realm? But you need both of these functions in a society. Is what's good for the realm, and then what's good or advantageous for private property dynamics. And libertarianism cannot conceive of anything about what's good for the realm. It doesn't think in those terms. It only thinks about property ownership relations with property owners. And so I think that's a really good way of thinking about it. Is you have to realize that these two have to interplay. You need private property society, but you also need what's good for the realm. Because if you only have private property society, you get Starbucks trying to gaify everything, right? You
Yeah.
have to have this dynamic, this feedback mechanism. If you get too much like realm thinking, you get like communism or something. So you do have to have both of these dynamics in it. But it's particular to context. It depends on specifics of threats. It depends on the health of the culture. It depends on the ability for the families to be, right now families are very weak. We live in a very weak,
Mhm.
destitute, effeminate time, and so you are going to lose some of those freedoms. That's just the natural way of things.
Let's this question from Paul. Paul's had some good questions from down under. Um, would you gents agree that a large, no, I'm not going to do an Australian accent. Would you agree that a large enough portion of the right shakes off the mind virus of reform, not revolution, that we will begin to make real ground in political takeover? Right. What do you think about that, CJ? That's a good one to.
Yeah.
That's a good
So
one to
so
try.
so is he saying that that once a large enough portion shakes off the mind, right, of reform, not
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
revolution? Yeah. Um, this is a difficult one, because, like, historically, I definitely would have been a reform, not revolution person.
Yeah.
I think that was because we had Western civilization was something worth preserving.
Yeah.
And I think that was Burke's entire case against the French Revolution, was that revolution is actually, you're not going to get what you want out of it.
Yeah.
Nowadays, I don't know what's left to preserve, but
Mm,
revolution can still be dangerous, you
yeah.
know? So I think you need some sort of like revival of the decentralized heritage of America, because that's both revolutionary in terms of countering the
Yeah. It's counter
managerial
revolutionary.
elite.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's also historically rooted. So
Yeah.
I think that's the way out for us. No, they don't have that in Australia, so I don't know what to tell you. Good luck, I guess.
Yeah.
But like
Well,
that's
no,
true.
they do have a very, I mean, if we want to talk about Australia and things that, similarities in the Anglosphere, like Canada and America and Australia, I mean, these are frontier societies, much like America, and that
Yeah,
you do have this very libertarian impulse among like actual Australians and actual Canadians. Like you see like the trucker protests in Canada, for instance. So that those things exist, that culture is there to a certain degree, but in terms of like the political structure of decentralization and so forth, and maybe not as much as far as what you're getting at. But I think in general, though, like the West and all of these, like the revolution's already happened, right? That's what we have to understand. Like the revolution already took place, right? We're not. I mean, so many people think like, oh, it's happening or it's gonna happen or the left is gonna take over and the World Economic Forum is going to put us in pods and make us eat
yeah,
bugs. And it's like, man, it's already happened. The
it's already
thing that
happened.
you think you have has been dead for 50 years.
Yeah,
It doesn't exist anymore, right?
it's
You
like
are,
that. It's like
yeah,
the Garrett Garrett essay. The revolution's behind you. You know, he's
yeah,
like you're looking in the wrong direction. It came by and basically in World War I, it basically the revolution came and went, and it like that was what the managerial revolution was. Is it did away with old America and reestablished itself, and basically the 20th century was built on top of the ruins of like Western heritage.
yeah, yeah. And like once you get that, once
Yeah.
you start to understand that, then you could proceed forward.
Hmm.
And so anything that you do proceeding forward is going to be counter revolutionary, even if it's not like capital T revolutionary, where you're, you know, totally destroying and upending society. You are upending what has been manufactured for us post revolution,
Yeah.
right? That's what it means. So in that sense, it is right. You're returning to the root. You're being radical,
Hmm.
in the true sense of the term. And yeah, I think if people, and hopefully, yeah, hopefully this makes sense, right? People begin to adopt that kind of mindset, that we're decades past the revolution,
Yeah.
and whatever we're going to do, whatever we're going to produce, whatever good that we do in our lifetimes is by necessity going to be counter revolutionary. It's not there's no reforming it, right? There's no reforming this monstrosity and turning it back into the constitutional republic. That's been dead for a long time now.
Hmm.
Um, and so, yeah, so I think in those terms, and people have like on the right have to begin to adopt that. Some of that is like the whole Christian nationalist thing is sort of a movement in that direction, and other more radical rightism stuff online is that sort of thing. But that's the stuff that scares the normie con,
Yeah.
because they're living in this world where the revolution hasn't happened yet. Oh, it's
Hmm.
maybe around the corner.
Yeah.
Oh, maybe Biden's going to do something really bad.
Yeah.
And
Or
it's
like
like,
Barack Obama, like started our decline or something.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Exactly. Um and so yeah, this is a good, I think, yeah, we've got maybe a few more minutes. I know I have to get going. You probably do too, CJ. Um
I have more
this
time than
last
you today, so
yeah, that's how the tables have turned. So yeah, regarding Theonomous from the 80s to today, from Aaron again, it seems to me that they frequently read Torah through a libertarian lens and assumed the libertarian outcome they propose. Yeah, I think, let me read his follow up too. Um, here we go. It doesn't really factor in the circumstances of when and where the Torah was given, and concludes the principles of government that it shouldn't, not that the law of God doesn't inform the government. Yeah, and so this maybe will get me in trouble with Theonomous, um, who I have a lot of respect for. Love all my Theonomist homies. But you see this where, yeah, in the 80s, all these guys, Rushdoony, Bonson, all of them, they were influenced by Rothbard and by Mises and Hayek and the emerging libertarian movement in the 70s and 80s. Like there was an influence on their thinking, of course. And so they read it in that paradigm. But you see that there are like left liberal theonomists now too. And that this is kind of the stuff that you talk about, CJ, where they could take the Bible and shape it in this like biblicist sense to make it
Yeah.
say the outcome that they want. So,
Yeah.
oh, here we have theonomy that says we shouldn't have a death penalty somehow, right? Like there are guys that do that, and of course it's nonsense and silly. And at least the Theonomous of the '80s, like there was some compatibility between the two. It made some sense because what the libertarians were looking at, they were looking at some semblance of reality in terms of property rights and so forth. And the law of God is rooted in reality, but as Aaron says, it's rooted in a particular people and place and time and history,
100%.
right?
Yeah.
And so yes, can we glean from the principles that God has established? Absolutely, right? So when people talk about like general equity theonomy from the Westminster Confession, right, that is that
Well,
makes sense because you're applying it to a different particular people and place, and exercising wisdom in doing
yeah.
that. That
I mean,
you know,
those Mosaic laws were instantiations of eternal things that are still relevant today. I mean, that's what
absolutely.
they were. They were the application within a specific context of things that are always relevant to us, and so we should look to them for guidance. Absolutely. I think I want to end on the fact that I love Rothbard. In fact, I
Yeah.
um I went through like a little phase where I was just like not interested in anything, but then you go back and you read like Rothbard stuff from the 90s. Like he had this essay called
Mhm.
The Franciscan Way, basically like expositing the contributions of Sam Francis. And you're like, dude, Rothbard is so sharp. And,
Yeah.
so there's a reason why in the 90s, like the paleo conservatives and paleo libertarians got together because they had a
Yeah.
dual enemy.
Yeah.
Or, they had a singular enemy and they worked together. But
Yeah.
so like, I still love like late stage Murray Rothbard is fantastic.
Well, yeah, I think too. I remember listening to the history lectures that Rothbard gave. I think at like New York University. That Hoppe is the one that recorded them,
Mhm.
and they're phenomenal. Like
Yeah.
his analysis of history, right? Even though I maybe nitpick some things and maybe emphasizes the material a little bit too much and economics a little bit too much as a motivator, but he got into the nitty gritty and explained the entire period of American history from 1865 to World War II.
Yeah.
And
He completely just calls out like the managerial elite and like some of
yeah,
those profound critiques of the American, imperial system are found in libertarian literature,
yeah,
especially with Mises, the Mises Institute circles.
yeah. He, he,
Don't read
he
Cato. That'll just make you stupid. But yeah,
no, like that kind of oh, man, no, yeah, no, like these is the only part of libertarianism that like is worth anything,
yeah,
right?
yeah. And Paul
And
Gottfried is a fellow there too. So
yeah, yeah,
yeah,
the reason why it's worth something, you know.
yeah,
And so, yeah, I think about it those ways. Like I still look fondly at it, and the same thing. Like we brought up Theonomous. Like I still there's still a lot of Rushdoony's and Bonson's critiques that are unbelievably good. And
yeah,
so I'm never gonna, I'm never gonna stop. Love these. Oh, friend of the show, Joshua Ebitoy, right? He chimes in here. This kind of answers, to the TLDR of the whole episode is I stopped being libertarian after I had kids. Yeah, that's pretty much that's pretty much it, man. Like that's it, right? I had kids,
yeah,
and it's like, okay, I'm the king now. I'm wielding power,
yeah.
and I just have to. I
It's
can't
like,
just
wait,
not.
maybe Bill Gates shouldn't have the right to like put hormones in my kid's food. Like
That's right.
I don't know.
Yeah,
Just
yeah,
just a
like
suggestion.
yeah, absolutely. Well, what have you got on the docket this week that you want
I
to
finished
promote?
up Heritage History Month with a very
Yes.
controversial post. Not controversial. It wasn't controversial. It was a completely normal post
I
on
didn't think
Robert
it
E.
was.
Lee. But it got some good hits, and so I finished up that. I wrote my post, why I'm not a libertarian. So I've been pretty active. I got a couple more essays that I'm about to publish the next couple of days. So I've been pretty active on that. Chronicles Magazine podcast is back. You can check that out as well. Today's episode though did get booted to Monday, so I've been pretty busy.
Yeah, that's great. Well, yeah, I have a bunch more writing to do. I'm still working on another book, and I'll just drip that out there a little bit. There'll be more stuff coming from the next book. Um, and I'm not even going to say. I don't think I've said yet exactly what it's about, so I'll leave that a mystery for now. But also, CJ always forgets this to plug contramundum podcast.com to
Yes.
support the show. Yeah, go there if you want to support the show. We're planning to do a March
Yeah, we're
episode
gonna do our
for.
first. Well, first of all, we're gonna do a maybe we'll do something live when we're together at the end of March. You should not
Yes,
like
we'll.
just for supporters.
Yeah,
Something really cool.
we'll be meeting up in real life,
Yeah.
IRL, for the very first time. And also, I wanted to. I promised I would do this, shout out my wife who has been baking sourdough bread all week long, as a protest, as a form of she's doing trad wife stuff, but not for the public to consume, just for me and my kids.
And
So
supporters.
yes, yeah,
Oh. I
maybe
don't
I'll
know.
send a loaf of sourdough to everybody. Uh, but no, that if you've been aware of the online discourse regarding sourdough bread, you'll get what I mean there. But yeah, so a lot of stuff like that, and we're trying to roll out more things for all the people that are loyal listeners that love hanging
Thousand
out with us every
thousand of you.
every week. We appreciate all of you, and yeah, if you like what you're hearing, want more of this content, more of these kinds of discussions, subscribe and share it. Send it to all of your libertarian friends and everyone else, and we'll keep on rolling with this. We're having a lot of fun, and yeah, at the end of the month is going to be a fun, very fun shindig between CJ and me. And so until next week, when we're back together again, all of you stay dangerous, peacefully, of course. Stay dangerous, and we will see you next time.